Or just
Yeah.
really not.
Kate Milafalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and welcome back. Popular demand, Larry. People are. Oh, I can hardly wait. So this is part 3 of Larry Jordan's discussion about his book. Oh, I have been lifting weights. The Real Marilyn Monroe. Debunking the myths and revealing intimate new details of her life and death. And it's just endless, the stuff that is not truly out there. You have things in your book that nobody else talks about.
That's right.
It's fascinating. So thank you, Larry. Welcome back. I'm delighted
Thank you.
you're willing to do this. I know that this is almost overwhelming. There's so much to talk about. So we've been behind the scenes here. We've been trying to plot out a good way to address the chronology of Marilyn's life. There's so many themes, I guess you'd call them, and then the actual year by year chronology. So what did we decide to talk about first today?
Well, I think we could trace a little bit the evolution of Marilyn's desire to be a movie star.
Okay.
It's not something that happened just after she started modeling. I would preface this by saying that I think most Marilyn fans are aware that she spent a lot of time in foster homes.
Yeah.
One count was 13. They were, most of them, horrific, but she also was in an orphanage periodically, and of course escaped that situation, as we've discussed previously, at around the age of 16. But a lot of people assume that by virtue of this being at loose ends with her life as she was growing up, that she didn't spend any time with Gladys, her mother, at all. But that's not true. Gladys was a film editor at MGM, and she managed to save enough money to buy a small, modest house and move her and her daughter, Norma Jean, in it. Now, this, I think, happened around the time that her son, I believe her son's name was Jackie, died. He had been with his father, I believe, and Gladys became obsessed with regaining control of Norma Jean and making a home for her and so forth. So for a brief while that happened. Marilyn, when she got older, talked about this experience. They had this house with basically no furniture, but one day a couple of, or more than a couple of moving men arrived with a white baby grand piano.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Didn't even have a piano bench, but it looked good in this otherwise empty living room. And as it turns out, neither Marilyn nor Gladys could play the piano, but anyway, it was some kind of I guess, a symbol to them both.
Status, yeah.
Home,
yeah.
You know, bona fide home. Ultimately, Marilyn tracked down, after she became a star, she tracked down this white piano. She had it in her apartment in New York. And it's also the piano that she used for rehearsal purposes when she had Richard Adler come in, and pianist, to rehearse for her appearance at Madison Square Garden, singing Happy Birthday to the President. So that white piano was symbolic. Anyway, what I was going to bring us back to is the fact that Gladys would take Norma Jean to a point across the street from the Coconut Grove, which is a very popular nightclub. And
let me interrupt you. Isn't that the one that burnt down?
I think you're right.
Yeah. So, go ahead. Sorry.
And it was a place where you could see stars coming and going, because it's a very popular place. You had to have some bucks to be able to go there yourself. And I don't recall knowing that Marilyn ever did until she became a star. But anyway, they would be across the street watching the big stars come and go. And Marilyn was just infatuated with that. She would also go, and she would do this sometimes on her own on Saturday afternoons, go to Grauman's, if I'm pronouncing Grauman's Chinese Theater, where, of course, people probably know that they had cement. And when the cement was wet, they would invite select stars to come and put their handprints, sometimes their footprints, in the cement, autograph it with their name. And Marilyn would spend endless hours trying to fit her little dainty hands in the profiles of other big stars
Yeah, yeah.
and dream and dream. She acknowledged early on that she realized there were a lot of young ladies like her who were dreaming of becoming stars in Hollywood. But she said, I am dreaming the hardest.
Yeah.
And
She
that's what
worked.
she
She
did.
worked the hardest.
Yes, she
She
did.
really worked at it. Yeah, she was tenacious. Have you ever been to Grauman's?
No, I have never been.
Oh, it's turned into a three-ring circus. It didn't used to be, but you know, now there's people in costumes and those balloon things that wave in the, you know, the
Oh, yeah.
long thin. Yeah, I don't know what they're called. And you know, it's a three-ring circus, but it is cool to see the old names and their, you know, their footprints. And I think Lassie's footprints are there, if I
Oh,
remember
yes, that's
correctly. Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Well, a lot of people think that Marilyn's first movie role was Ladies of the Chorus, but that's not entirely true. She had bit parts. She was an extra in a film, Green Green Grass of Wyoming. She was in a square dance scene, for example.
Oh, that's right. That's a
You
good
know,
book.
she had 20 words and in the Right Cross, just 20 words. Never got any film credit. But what's interesting is you remember we were talking earlier in an earlier episode about how Marilyn was taking lessons when she finally got her foot in the door for studio contractors. She was taking everything from fencing lessons, dancing lessons, singing lessons, and so forth. And that paid off for her. One of the things that I found very surprising in researching my 768-page book called The Real Marilyn Monroe is that she became a dancing pacer.
Yes, I thought that was so interesting.
Who in the world knows what a dancing pacer
Oh,
is?
I do.
Well, you
I
tell
have
me.
a daughter. I have a daughter who's a dancer.
Okay. Well, Marilyn would be behind the camera. She was skilled enough as a dancer that for a while she would be behind the camera and do the same dance steps as the dancers that were in
Yeah.
front of the camera performing a number. So she had to be exactly precise because they were trying to synchronize their
The
steps.
timing, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd see that. You would see that in an old 1930s movie where you'd see all the chorus, the dancers chorus rehearsing, and they're all in their rehearsal
Right.
clothes. And there's usually a guy, and in the movie they can't show you him behind the camera, so he's usually at the front of the chorus of dancers, and they're following his lead. But essentially, that's what he is, you know,
I
keeping
thought
the
that was
rhythm.
so interesting that, when money is on the line and they need to get takes correctly when they're
Mhm.
filming, and you can imagine the difficulty of even filming a dance sequence because all it takes is one person to be out of sync or, step wrong or whatever. It was very, very important. So this is not just something to shrug off about Marilyn's career, that she was a dance pacer for a while.
Well, you have to have impeccable timing and a good
Yeah,
memory for
absolutely.
choreography. I mean, it's a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She also was involved in theater. Now, if you go to Wikipedia, it and some other sources, it says that no, Marilyn never did any theatrical work. That is wrong, absolutely wrong. She did appear in some local productions in Los Angeles, one of which ran for a couple of months. In November of '47, she did a movie or not a movie, but a stage production called Glamour Preferred. How many people, their reviews over in that venue. In '48, she did Stage Door. Now, stop and think. This is a woman that was known to be petrified in front of a movie camera. She was skilled in front of a still camera.
Yeah.
Apparently, she had no issue with stage fright or lack of ability to memorize her lines. So it's intriguing to me that she started out as basically kind of a stage performer, or
Yeah.
at least had familiarity with that type of activity, in the acting realm. So that's always intrigued me that no one has really pursued that. There's not a lot of.
Well, she said once, and you wrote this in your book, I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure, that it was the notion of millions of eyes on her at the same time. with the
Right.
camera that got to her.
Well, also the fact that when you go to a movie theater, unlike today where you can watch a movie on TV, in the old days where the only way you could do that would be to go to a movie theater, which had a vast screen, that enlargement of you would magnify every little imperfection.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
thing I wanted to make sure I said this time that I've been wanting to say is that everybody from her acting coach, Paula Strasberg, to James Haspiel, the young man that befriended her as a teenager, to umpteen people, I've lost track of how many,
I know what
remarked,
you're going to say.
remarked that she was so much prettier in person than she was on the
Yeah.
screen. And we all know she looked gorgeous on the screen. So
And
that's
you
really
know,
what she
you
was.
talked about bus stop.
Pardon me.
The director Logan, I thought I wrote this down because it really struck me. Here's a guy who's experienced working with actors, and he said that she was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, that he'd ever worked with as far as actual acting goes. And every single photographer said she was flawless.
Yeah.
She wasn't perfect, but she was flawless. It's weird, you know. Luminescent is the word they use over and over and over.
That I have it in the book, and I can't recreate it, off the top of my mind now. Pardon me. But people have done kind of an analysis of her anatomy.
Oh my God!
It's but in a complimentary way, that she looked longer legged than she was, and she looked taller than she was. When people met her, they found out she was 5'5", but because of her top heavy proportions and her tiny, tiny little waist that she photographed, she kind of fooled the camera. And there's a gentleman named Scott Fortner. A lot of people know him. He's possibly the preeminent collector of memorabilia of Marilyn's over the years. He and Greg Schreiner, but both of them have apparel. They've collected apparel. They can display it on mannequins and so forth. But they can give you the exact dimensions of her waist. And even during the time when she may have been a little bit heavier and didn't even like her appearance on screen because of that fact, she still was very tiny waisted. And it's hard to imagine that she was, but she kept herself in very good shape.
She was, yeah, she's very disciplined. And I find that the hardest thing to read about is the constant analysis of her body parts. I just feel like that's a large part of, well, no, let me rephrase that. That's misogyny coming out on film, on camera. Women are absolutely parsed. Their body parts are analyzed down to the, we don't do that to men. And I find that distracting. Don't you find that distracting?
A preview of a book I'm writing on Reagan, they thought his head was too small when he was auditioning for parts. His head was too small because he was kind of broad-shouldered. And they would dress him in colors that gave the illusion that he was a little narrower of frame than he really was.
Yeah, but they're not.
But there wasn't the obsession about male,
Yeah, yeah.
That I agree.
I'll say I always thought he had a big rectangular blockhead, but that's my prejudice coming through. So bad. Well, so anyway, I interrupted you, and I'm sorry.
No,
we're talking about her early stage experience, right. And it was significant. Yeah.
She, I think the film that most people would know about, and you could see it on TV, call up, is Ladies of the Chorus. And I particularly like that film. Actually, it's one of my favorites. People don't seem to talk about it very much, but she was a chorus girl. And it's all about kind of society's snobbery, really. She caught the eye of a very wealthy young man who proposed to her and was prepared to marry her. But he was afraid of what his aristocratic mother, socialite mother, would think. So they kind of kept it a secret, maybe another plot. And but the mother was elated that her son was finally going to, to marry this woman, and Marilyn's character named Peggy made a good impression, very favorable impression of the woman. So she decided to hold an engagement party and invite all of her socialite friends. The problem was, coincidentally, the 3-member band and a comedian whom she hired to entertain the guests knew Marilyn and spilled the beans and said, "Oh, this is the queen of burlesque." And this was said in front of the guest. So you can imagine Marilyn and her fiance were ready to slink off out of the house because this is so embarrassing. But the mother, to her credit, saved the day. And she had an announcement to all the assembled aristocrats in her living room. And she said, "Well, a lot of people," I'm paraphrasing, "a lot of people don't know this, but I too started as a chorus girl. As a matter of fact, strike up the band." And she starts singing and performing a burlesque number, and just so completely disarmed her audience that everybody was applauding. She diffused the embarrassment. First,
Who played the mother?
You got me again now, naughty. I warned you I was going to remember all these names, and we can look it up.
I'm looking it up. You keep talking.
But it was interesting because she, the woman, the script called, of course, for her to really reveal in the end, privately, that she had not been a chorus girl, but she didn't like the snobbery because she.
So she was lying?
She was actually lying to her.
Oh, that's even better.
To her guests. But it was a lesson in appreciating people's value for who they really are.
Was she Mrs. Carroll?
Say it again.
The mother, Mrs. Carroll?
I believe so.
Nana Bryant, I never heard of her.
Are you looking in my book for that?
No, I just put it on my phone. Is this the woman?
Could be. It kind of looks like it. Doesn't she look like a very elite, sophisticated lady?
Yeah, she's sort of looking down her nose.
Well, Marilyn, I thought, made a pretty good impression of that because that was a fairly meaty role. She wasn't just an extra in a square dance like she'd been before. She didn't just have 20 words like she had previously.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting. But then her next role, oddly enough, she ends up in a Marx Brothers film, which her screen time is about 60 seconds. I watched it again the other night. It's a musical comedy called Love Happy.
Love Happy, yeah.
She does perform well and sashaying into the room. And you can certainly see Groucho's eyebrows bouncing around and his big cigar. And she reports, he plays a detective, and she comes to his detective agency. And she says that some man is following me. And of course, he has a joke in response to that. But anyway, it was kind of a clever little, almost a cameo, really. But the next film, which was in 1950, is the one that is actually my daughter's favorite of all the films. All About Eve. A lot of people.
I love that movie. But Marilyn Monroe is not who I love in the movie.
Right.
She was okay, but I love Betty Davis. Yes. So
we've discovered that about you, Helen. And I give her due. It's kind of interesting to tell you how the two interacted. It was, I guess people kind of know the premise that Betty Davis portrayed this wonderful, like I think Broadway star, stage star. And she was kind of past her prime. Maybe that's derogatory or sexist to say that, but her career was kind of on the downswing.
On the downswing, yeah.
And a gal that used to stand outside the stage door or in the alley and get an autograph, played by Ann Baxter, befriended her and became her assistant. And then through a Machiavellian scheme, Ann Baxter's character arranged for Betty to miss a performance, get stranded in a car somewhere. So her understudy by that point was Ann Baxter. She got to go on stage. She just kind of took over. And it was based on a true story. I have it in my book who actually experienced that in real life and was the progenitor of the idea or promulgator of the idea. What's a couple of things that are interesting about that film is the fact that Marilyn was intimidated by Betty Davis, but I don't think that was anything uncommon, because men who worked with her were also intimidated by, Betty Davis's presence. She was a very serious-minded actress, had a biting tongue, and she got impatient with Marilyn at one point when Marilyn flubbed some lines, and she yelled at her, and Marilyn had to flee the set and throw up.
Go cry. Yeah.
Now, years later, I saw Betty Davis, and I talk about this in my book. She appeared on the Dick Cavett talk show.
I was just thinking about that.
Were you?
One of my favorite ever interviews on any talk show ever was when Betty Davis froze Dick Cavett.
Right. Well, what was interesting is she discussed Marilyn Monroe, and she expressed great sympathy for actresses, and specifically Marilyn and her nerves. And Betty, again paraphrasing, said something along the lines of, the average person doesn't know what a tremendous nervous strain it is for an actor or actress to be giving a performance, whether that be on stage or in front of the camera, because you're so afraid you're going to screw it up.
Yeah.
And so she said you have to have a very strong will. And I happen to have a strong will. But not everybody does. Yes, and not everybody does, and some people really suffer. So she gave credit to Marilyn for having soldiered through. There's another little anecdote that I find kind of amusing about making that film. And that is that the actor, a British actor, George Sanders, was in that film.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, talk about the cosmopolitan man and the tuxedo and the whole thing. And he brought Marilyn's character along as an escort. He played the role of a film critic. And they have some amusing scenes, rather sardonic.
One of my favorite lines in any movie.
Absolutely. And anyway, at one point during the filming, they had to fly to a shooting location. And George Sanders at that point was married to Zsa Zsa Gabor. And the three of them were sitting on the plane. And Zsa Zsa got upset because she said Marilyn kept batting her eyes at George. And she was very jealous. And so Zsa Zsa privately implored, or maybe I should say demanded, or maybe I should say threatened her husband that she wanted a role in that movie so she could take in it all and keep an eye on him. He did not relent, and he did not get her a role in that film. But I always thought it was amazing that Zsa Zsa, and of course her attractive daughter, Eva, and their mother, and so forth, these were Hungarian women that were very stylish and dripping with diamonds, and multiple husbands. Apparently were rather insecure over this upstart young woman that really hadn't had any big career.
Well, their only currency was their appearance and their attraction and any threat to that,
Right.
Yeah.
A postscript to that was that Anne Baxter befriended her on the set. Anne was a very, very nice person. Sarah Jordan Heinz wrote a book called Going Hollywood, Midwesterners of Movie Land. And Anne Baxter was from the Midwest, and Sarah interviewed her daughter and has a lot of insights about Anne. But Anne was a very nice lady and really took Marilyn under her wing. And I think probably was one of the reasons that Marilyn was able to acquit herself that well in front of the camera.
Well, can I say my favorite line?
Yeah.
So
well, I know what
Marilyn, Marilyn's all her slinky self, and she gets introduced as a student of the Copacabana School of Dramatic Arts. It never ceases to amuse me. It's so funny.
And I think then doesn't Betty introduce her to somebody else, and she introduces her to some other person there, and says that Marilyn knows so-and-so, Mr. DeWitt's mother, or something like that. Do you remember that line?
No, I don't. No, I don't remember.
It was an inside joke for all of them, that here was this gorgeous little gal, and George Sanders' character sends her over to flirt with another guy, and I think she says something like, "Well, why are they all so ugly?" or whatever. I have to watch that film again, but I love that film. It's so well done. So
It's a really good movie. Yeah, it's really good.
The next one was such a bomb of a movie. Maybe I'm prejudiced. Called The Fireball, and that was Mickey Rooney, whom I just am not a fan of.
Me neither.
And it was rather obnoxious. I did rewatch it recently, and Marilyn has, I don't know, maybe 6 minutes of screen time, and she did all right. A movie concerns Mickey's character, who is a roller derby star. And it's certainly a movie that she could have done without, but oh well.
Well, watching him is difficult because I can't get beyond the knowledge that I'm watching somebody in the throes of some substance cocktail of uppers and downers. And he's hypermanic, and it's really difficult to watch. Yeah. Okay.
And also, the other one would be The Asphalt Jungle. Now, that was the dramatic role, not a comedic role.
Yeah.
And there's a little story I tell in my book about that, where she auditioned for the director, John Huston, I should say.
John Huston, yeah.
And she didn't initially get the part or win him over. He had somebody else tapped for it. But remember, I talked about John Carroll and his wife, Lucille Ryman. Lucille actually was like a talent representative. And for that brief while, she was representing Marilyn. And they were determined, the couple, to get Marilyn in that role because they thought she
was perfect for it.
Yeah. Perfect. She played the mistress of kind of a gangster type,
bad guy,
much older man, and so forth. And so they had a little leverage. It turns out that maybe people know John Huston was a gambling addict. He lost a fortune in Vegas and all the other gambling venues you can imagine. And he owed the Raymonds, we'll say, John Carroll and his wife, money because he owed them like $18,000 because they were boarding 23 Irish stallions.
I'd forgotten about this.
that he owned, but he was so far behind in paying their boarding fees that they invited director John Huston out to their ranch one day and pointed out to him that, if he didn't put Marilyn in that film like they wanted, they were going to sell off these horses to pay the money, pay his bill that they owed him. So I always thought that was a very interesting concept on how you get in. And I'm sure there are other stories over the years in Hollywood. Some behind the scenes, backroom deal. But it just amused me that they used his gambling addiction against him.
Now, John Huston, that was Angelica Houston's father, right?
Yes, it was.
I have a particular aversion to bad fake Irish accents, and it's a very, very difficult accent to imitate, and it's not an accent, there are regional accents, and the regions are much smaller than going American state by state. But in the same way that you can tell a Chicago accent from a New Orleans accent, you can tell west of Ireland, east of, So anyway, never, ever, ever have I heard anybody fake an Irish accent on stage, on screen, and do a reputable job. Before I heard Angelica Houston do it. Come to find out, she was raised in Ireland. She spent her childhood in Ireland. And she's very good. The movie The Dubliners, the James Joyce book, the short stories they turned into a movie, The Dubliners, in the 80s. I recommend that movie. It's really a beautiful visually. They spend a lot of quoting from his writings, so it's beautiful script. And she's fabulous in it. But that's an aside. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. The next film was You're as Young as You Feel in 1951. It was actually the first film for 20th Century Fox that Johnny Hyde had negotiated for, basically. And it was part of her 7-year contract. The thing that is disturbing about that period and her work on that film was not the film itself. It was the fact that Elia Kazan, I never pronounce these names correctly.
Yeah, I know who you mean, yeah.
who was the ultimate misogynist. He had an affair, he claimed, with Marilyn at one point and bragged about her. And he spoke so pejoratively of females generally that I think it really repulsed Marilyn to the point where she ended up not being a friend. But what Kazan did in 51 is he introduced her to, you know who?
Joe DiMaggio, right?
No.
No?
Arthur Miller.
Oh, okay.
Arthur Miller.
But
which was equally tragic, but you know, as things turned out.
She wasn't already married to Joe DiMaggio, was she at that point?
No.
Okay, that's the confusion. Okay,
No.
okay. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, her picker was broken.
Well, and it was helped along by some of these people who were trying to take advantage of her and set her up.
Yeah.
And Eli Kazan had taken advantage of her, and he probably thought, you know, Arthur might. I don't think Arthur really was the type to do that at the time. He was a cerebral, pontificating, pipe smoking, narcissistic jerk.
He was a narcissistic misogynist from day one. Yeah.
I don't think he was a ladies' man like Kazan was.
Maybe
Marilyn
not.
Alluded to that later.
Yeah, but
he found his lovemaking skills lacking. Let's put it that way. So,
well, the way he betrayed his wife and his children says everything you need to know about him in my book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The next one was also a forgettable film called Love Nest.
Yeah.
Up to a point. In a way, it was kind of interesting because it concerned a young woman that had rented an apartment. This couple a married couple owned an an older apartment that they were restoring, and they rented an apartment to her, and she had known this man when he was in the military, and she had done him a great favor. I think he was in a military hospital, and he said, well, look me up sometime if you ever need any help. And she did, and there was some jealousy with the spouse there, the wife.
Yeah.
The thing that stuck out, and Marilyn was perfectly fine in that film. It was kind of an interesting premise, but Jack Parr was in that film. And Jack Parr was an obnoxious guy who went so far in his career that I have never been able to understand why.
Yeah, he was
nasty. He was in the early pioneering days of television, and he hosted The Tonight Show for a while. We've talked about that before. And he said very malicious things about Marilyn, criticized her intellect, claimed she was carrying around books, as we talked about.
Yeah, to make a point. Yeah.
And my question for him would be, how the hell do you know? How do you know? Were you shadowing?
Well, you know, and you know this, there are people who feel better about themselves if they can make other people look small.
Yeah.
It's awfully odd. So I watched that recently, that movie. I don't know. There's a genre of a time period in Hollywood filmmaking that I find really unappealing, and it starts in the late 40s and it goes into the mid 60s, almost 20 years. I don't know if it's the gender politics or if it's the social mores of the time broadly, you know, more broadly. I have a really hard time sticking with the movie to the end of the movie for a lot of these movies, and it's not because of her, it's because of the script and the premise and
the scripts weren't that great.
No, they were terrible.
Formula stuff. They were filming them in a hurry. They didn't allow a lot of time, so they weren't doing a lot of retakes. The basic story, and I'm getting ready to talk about a couple of real dogs of films, and maybe that's unfair to dogs generally to malign them because I love dogs, but Let's Make It Legal was really nothing memorable. She kind of played the part of a gold digger in a way. Didn't have much success. It was just kind of a blah film.
Oh, there it is. I was trying to find it on my list and it's buried. Okay, I found it.
Hometown Story was one I had high hopes for. Being involved in journalism, I thought any story that had to do with a crusading newspaper editor would be something that I personally would enjoy. She played the secretary in a newspaper office, and the plot concerned a man that had once been a politician. He became an editor of this small town newspaper and started going after a unsavory corporation that was really quite corrupt. And I regard this as the Hometown Story as a propaganda film, but I'm not sure how that came about. It wasn't a war propaganda film, I don't think. Maybe it was. But the whole objective seemed to be to glorify big business. In fact, the premise was it takes big business to do business. So
See, that's the mores of the time. That remember the whole Eisenhower military industrial complex.
Right.
That was that rise of corporate hegemony. Yeah.
Of course, Eisenhower in his departing speech warned against the
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, so in this plot, this crusading editor is writing a series of stories exposing the corruption of a local company. But then he has a complete turnabout when his much, much, much younger sister, which also didn't seem plausible to me, is trapped, I think, in a mine somewhere, and it takes heavy moving equipment of a big corporation.
Baby Jessica.
So he now, scales are falling from his eyes. He now realizes that, we've got to accept the fact that big corporations are what, makes the world go round. So there you go. So that's Hometown Story. Monkey Business is a film I've not explored that much, but I know that Cary Grant was in it. Have you seen that film by chance?
I don't remember. If you tell me I love Cary Grant, so the chances are that I did see it, and terrible memory for details. So
Harold Hawks was the director, which should tell you it's a good film, and Ginger Rogers was in it. But Peter Bogdanovich later commented that he felt that it was miscast and that Marilyn Monroe should have taken Ginger Rogers' part as the love interest.
What's the premise? Is he a professor?
That's a good question. What was the premise? It was something that I have not grasped.
I'll look. I wish I could remember. I love Cary Grant.
I think he was a professor, actually. There are some notable scenes that I can't aptly describe. And I always felt that Cary Grant and Marilyn had an interesting chemistry on the screen. And they became friends. And I previously mentioned that he wrote her a lovely letter one time when he got wind of the fact he might go to Korea, because he and his wife, Betsy, had been to Korea to entertain the troops. So, and over the years, Cary Grant remained close to Marilyn. And so they really did form a bond in that film. So I found it intriguing that Peter Bogdanovich, famous director and producer, would actually say that Ginger shouldn't have been cast as the love interest in this film.
Well, I just looked it up, and it's the premise is Cary Grant is indeed a doctor, but it's not the movie I was thinking of. Mm-hmm. The movie I was thinking of, he's like a child psychologist or a behaviorist, mm-hmm. and I saw that movie as a child. And the epic line where the mother says to the bratty kid who's being brought to therapy, to Cary Grant, say thank you to the good doctor. And the kid looks at him and goes, the good doctor stinks. And he was very good in that movie. He did his usual sort of fumbling egghead thing that he did. But this one that you're thinking of, Monkey Business, it actually has to do with a chemist who invents a pill that defies the aging process.
Oh, yeah.
A chimpanzee gets loose, and that's where it leaves me.
What is it with the chimpanzee movies of that era? Bedtime for Bonzo with Reagan. In that case, the chimp actually tried to strangle Reagan, by the way, with a necktie, and they had to come and cut the tie.
No comment.
One reviewer of this film, Monkey Business, said that Marilyn had only moved up 1 point from 0 in her acting ability, and it really wasn't worth it. So that was a Washington Star reporter that said that about that film, and I guess that didn't go over too well.
Well, it's probably not remembering whether I've seen it or not. I'm gonna pontificate about it. It's probably one of those typical early 50s movies where there's absolutely no character development. It's all
Yeah.
stereotypes, and there's nothing you can do with that. If you're really an actor, what are you supposed to do? So,
Right. Right.
you know,
1952 was Don't Bother to Knock, and that's a film I personally wish she had never made. I just think that described as a psychological thriller. She plays a woman who is very mentally disturbed,
oh,
violent, unkind to a child. I just can't see her even accepting that role.
I can't. That must have been like a re-traumatization for her to be in that
Mhm.
movie. That's terrible.
Well, and I think it was a case possibly where she had a contractual obligation
Yeah,
and no one to defend her at that point. But you can
yeah,
kind of see how she would be, uh, you know, upset about that and get re-traumatized, as you say, about real life.
yeah.
But for her to be playing the victimizer rather than the victim struck me
That's just terrible. Yeah,
highly, highly
awful.
odd. We're Not Married featured uh, quite an interesting premise where this elderly justice of the peace takes office on Christmas Eve, and he marries a succession of about six couples that want to get married, I guess, for Christmas. The trouble is, he forgot his authority did not officially begin until January 1st.
Oh.
And it was discovered after the fact. And so all of these couples had to be notified that, you're not
Not
really
really
married.
married.
And the story, I thought it was very clever. And the
That is
story
clever. I like that. Yeah.
follows how these couples handled it. Some of them were relieved they were not married, and others were deeply embarrassed.
Horrified. Yeah, that's
And
great.
uh, so this is one that I thought, he ends up marrying remarrying the six people. Clash by Night is a film you're going to have to help me with.
Clash by Night. Isn't that something about gangsters and truck drivers and crime, like
Yes.
interstate transport crime? It's
Yes.
fascinating, right? Yeah.
I think actually that's one where she actually went to a trucking firm and saw how they operated. Now the memory is returning to
It's
me.
remarkable.
And that she would do research for her films, so to be able to understand the mindset. And this is before people really came, along to promote the method acting.
Yeah, yeah. She naturally understood what it took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon for actors that are serious about their craft to do that. Actors and actresses would often do that and experience. I
The
think
kind of do a shadow thing with a
right,
profession or
right.
like internish kind of
Right,
thing.
exactly right. I
taste.
think that's very valuable. Like anybody that
Yeah.
would be writing a book or a play, or you do research. So that's
Yeah.
good. It's very much in contrast to the method acting, where you're supposed to dredge up your own personal life experiences that are already traumatic, and do that.
Yeah.
Niagara 53. We need to make a note of 1953 because to me that was a defining period of Marilyn's life.
Yeah, those were big movies, some of them. Yeah.
There were three major movies in which she had major roles. She wasn't just cast in them, she had central roles in them. First being Niagara, which she played a woman plotting to do in her husband. Dramatic role. She looked very elegant, gorgeous pictures. In fact, we never showed the back of my book. I don't know why. But the back of the book, I'm going to obscure my picture. You don't need to see that again. But anyway, the back of the book does contain a picture from that film. She just looked absolutely luscious.
What, in the pink dress?
Yes.
Yeah, I watched that recently. I'd never seen it. I watch it, and I have to tell you, I think it's a gender thing, Larry. It was an interesting enough movie, but I had read that there was some scene where the camera follows her from behind as she walks.
Okay,
and
I
it
was getting to
big,
that.
Pardon me?
I was getting to that.
I don't get it.
Well, she had developed there's more than one scene where the camera lingers as she is walking away from the camera.
Yeah.
Someone decided, and again, we got to remember the time frame. It's not something you would necessarily do, or maybe you would do it now. It's even far more vulgar now. But anyway, it lingered on her derriere, and she had this hip swivel movement that was really quite the trademark for Marilyn. The camera lingered for quite a number of seconds as she walked away in this one scene. It was done for dramatic effect and probably for some titillating effect as well. And the aside regarding this is that Ralph Roberts, the masseur who befriended her, had pointed out that Marilyn had actually studied anatomy, and she carried a book around. She had studied anatomy not just to develop this walk, but she wanted to know about muscles and sinew and connections and how the body structure, was, so that she could understand movements. And also Andrew D. Dennis, by the way, one of the early photographers who we met, one of his contributions was he put a big full-length mirror next to his camera and tripod so she could see herself as she was posing.
That helped,
which I thought was brilliant to do that.
Yeah, real smart.
So
I didn't get. I have to. I think it's gender because I did not. I replayed that scene over and over, trying to figure out what is it, and it just was a woman walking away. So it's got to be gender.
Well, I think it probably is a hormonal thing. Guys that would watch that might have a different reaction than women.
I don't want to hear about that.
But the point was that there's a funny anecdote about this, and that is that Dominic Dunn, you may remember Dominic.
Love Dominic Dunn.
One of my favorites. He wrote a lot for Vanity Fair and so forth. And he told the story. He knew Marilyn. He told the story about the night a bunch of Hollywood wives invited Marilyn to a party. I think she showed up, if memory serves, in a very tight-fitting green sequined dress. Showed up late, of course. But these Hollywood wives, their husbands were already kind of lusting after this woman. They wanted to know, who is this gal? And she disarmed them. She was just a delight. And Dominic Dunn was there. And these Hollywood ladies, for example, Mrs. Freddie de Cordova. People may remember, if they ever watched Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, that Freddie de Cordova was his producer. Often Johnny would trade little quips with Freddie off camera. You rarely saw Freddie on camera. Occasionally you did. But he was in charge of The Tonight Show. And
I didn't like Johnny Carson. I never watched it.
Well, Freddie de Cordova's wife was among these groups, and they asked her to teach them how to do the Marilyn walk. So pretty soon there's like almost a conga line of all these ladies following Marilyn, and she's squealing with laughter, as are these ladies, and she's just having an uproarious time, showing them how to do the wiggle and the walk and that kind of thing. And she won them over with that party. So, something good came from Niagara, I guess. But
I think it says more about the times they were leaving than it does about the time they were in. I think people were so buttoned up and so restrained and so uptight that, during the war and the lead up to the war, psychological reasons for that, that relief afterwards, I think it's more about that subconsciously, than anything dramatic about her walk, because I just didn't see it.
Well, Niagara was I think it was generally, do you like that film?
Not really.
Okay.
No, not really.
You'd admit it's kind of a thriller. She dies in the end. I mean,
but I don't relate to the motivations of the characters. I would be much more direct. I mean, you can't help but put yourself in the shoes of the characters. What would I do if I were in the same situation? Yeah. It just seemed unnecessary. I don't know.
Well, it satisfied her craving for a dramatic role anyway. So
I'll tell you what I liked about the movie. I liked the location. And I liked it not because of the natural world, but I thought it was interesting to see. It reminded me of a time from my very young childhood when people took vacations like that, ordinary people, and the clothing and the cars and that. I
can relate to that.
Social historical context of it was, to me, the most interesting part of it.
Next film in 1953 also was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which co-starred one of my favorites, Jane Russell. And Marilyn had trouble getting a decent dressing room. And by the way, they kept telling her she was not a star.
Yeah.
She was not a star. And she said, well, I am the blonde in the movie. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. But she just couldn't convince them to give her a decent dressing room or whatever. And I think you know the premise of that film.
Mm-hmm.
She was, again, an attractive woman that was attracted the eye of a very rich man who had a very rich father. And the father was suspicious of this young woman's motives. So he hired a private detective to accompany them on a ship's cruise to see if she got in any trouble. What did you think of that film? Did you like that film?
I liked, that's where she sings Touch, in the hand, be quiet. Jen, diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I had to sing the song in my head to get it right. Yeah, I like the musical things in it. And I saw a great bumper sticker recently. It said blondes prefer gentlemen.
Probably true, actually.
I love that.
Jane Russell commented that Marilyn tried to preach, not really preach, but introduce her to religion. And let me reverse that. Jane Russell tried to introduce Marilyn to religion.
Yeah.
And Marilyn tried to introduce her to Freud. There's a little postscript that we could jump way ahead on. Jane Russell was very active in adoption programs, and particularly children from Asia, and getting them parents here in the United States. And a little bit later, when somebody became Attorney General, who was related to a famous family, he actually flew out to the West Coast and used it as a pretext to go out to Hollywood, which he was always doing, often to see Marilyn. But anyway, and he greeted these children. It didn't require the Attorney General to greet these kids. It could have been anybody else.
Right. It seems odd.
Jane Russell was part of that. Well, fast forward until after Marilyn died, and Jane said the next time she met the AG, he looked at her as if to say, and I quote, "You are my enemy." I couldn't resist that. We'll be teasing that for a future.
Yeah, that's something to think about, talk about more. That's odd.
Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was the one that I did really think was awfully funny. It had, oh my gosh, so many things. And do you remember her little lecture when the rich guy was saying, well, you're just after my son because of, the wealth? And she didn't really deny that. She said, wouldn't you rather that your daughter marry someone who has money and can take care of her? And it was very interesting, the wordplay that went on in that. And Marilyn delivered it so flawlessly. I thought it was really terrific. The fun comedy, also made in 53 or released in 53, was How to Marry a Millionaire.
Yes, and the lead up to that, you need to talk about that. I thought that was so interesting.
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, actually.
Oh, preparation for the role.
Oh, yes, where she had glasses and so forth. She played a nearsighted. The premise concerned three young ladies that rented a rich man's high-rise apartment in New York with the idea of marrying a rich millionaire. Well, by definition, a millionaire, I guess, is rich, but anyway. And but as things proceeded, they started selling off some of his personal property to raise money so they could live there and afford the rent. They kind of took advantage, but anyway. Marilyn portrayed a gal that wore glasses. I have a picture in my book that's hilariously funny of her with the kind of dorky glasses. But she was convinced that men don't make passes
at girls who wear
glasses. So she would often, if she found a prospective guy, she would take the glasses off, and she would bump into doors. She would read one scene. She's reading something, a menu or something, upside down, because she's blind as a bat. And to study for that role, she consulted, and I have it in my book, a pantomime. And I'm puzzled about that, but I guess a pantomime has to know a lot about physicality and movement, how to communicate silently
Right.
without words.
Yeah.
So Marilyn had to do almost, well, Lucille Ball did physical comedy too. And in a way, Marilyn was doing that when she would be bumping into things. And,
Yeah, she had to get across the idea of somebody who was actually kind of legally blind without her glasses.
Right.
And to do that, she studied what it would be like to mimic somebody who knew how to mimic being blind. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. One thing that's also an interesting aside, you think of Marilyn as having acquired a lot of knowledge about even her physical appearance, her makeup techniques, and so forth, and what was best for her. But they were getting ready to shoot a scene where the three ladies are sitting in lounge chairs on this beautiful terrace overlooking Manhattan. And they were getting ready to roll film, and Betty Grable glanced down at Marilyn Monroe's toenails, and they were a mess. And she called a halt to the filming and said to Marilyn, "You can't appear on camera like that." She needed her toenails painted so that she would look nice. She figured that, this is something that Marilyn and the director and everybody else had overlooked. So this was very nice that she, Betty Grable, did that to kind of save the day for Marilyn, so she was not, embarrassed. So that was looking out for each other. Marilyn also looked out for Betty because one day one of Betty's children was injured and she had to leave the set and go home. It wasn't anything serious, but she had to leave. And she remarked later that Marilyn was the only member of the cast and crew who called her to find out how the child was. That made such an impression on Betty Grable. Betty tore up her contract. She was as dissatisfied with filmmaking for the studio as Marilyn eventually became. And they ended up giving Marilyn Betty Grable's dressing room. And the press were goading Marilyn to pose right beside the door.
Rub it in, yeah.
And Marilyn refused. She didn't want anybody to even remotely suggest that she was replacing Betty Grable as a pinup. Betty was very famous during World War.
Oh, the biggest, yeah.
Yes, great legs, insured for $1 million and all that. And Marilyn had enough respect for her. She didn't want to replace her, so she would not pose by that door as long as Betty's name was on the door.
Yeah.
So those are the little character revelations about what Marilyn was really made of, I think.
Well, in the book, wasn't it about in this area? You talked about her doing things like one of the electricians had a sick family member, and she slipped him cash and reduced him to tears, and she was always handing money to the crew. The crew loved her. Crews always loved her because she treated regular people like they were human beings. Doesn't take a lot to endear yourself to people.
Yes.
I'll tell you, I have a janitorial service that I've done for decades, and I quickly stopped cleaning houses for people because there's this weird thing that people develop. I think it's an urge for power. If you clean a house for somebody, you are their servant, and there is immediately a hierarchy. And the nicest people. It's so interesting. You clean a business, and it's a contractual thing between different kinds of professionals, and the way that you're treated is completely different. And I don't think, well, I know for a fact there are a lot of people, at least in this culture, who don't give a lot of thought to the essential workers, the service people, that the people who do the things that nobody wants to do, right? And there's a little bit of a disdain, a little bit of a power dynamic that goes on, and she was devoid of that.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
She treated everybody, I don't care if it was the busboy or whoever, with respect. She just had no snobbery at all. None.
She'd been there, right? She came from abject poverty. She'd been, like she said, when she saw hungry children in Korea, she knew what it was like to be hungry.
Right.
Yeah.
In 1954, she made River of No Return, and that was kind of a breaking point for her. Starred Robert Mitchum. The odd thing about that was Robert Mitchum, Marilyn's first husband, Jim Doherty, and Jane Russell all knew each other from their early days and worked together. Jim and Robert worked in a factory together. And I saw a TV thing that's probably on YouTube in which they all three got together and reminisced about Marilyn. But I found that kind of interesting. Robert was a gentleman. He really respected Marilyn and vice versa. She was on a raft. It was an outdoorsy thing. The scenery, filmed in Canada largely, was spectacular. But Marilyn said the script took second place to the scenery.
To the scenery, yeah.
It was physically arduous and challenging because they would be throwing buckets of water on her to mimic her being on a raft. The little boy, whose name escapes me at the moment, who played the child in the movie, was warned by his priest not to talk to Marilyn.
Don't talk to her. She's a hussy.
Scarlet woman, you know. They ultimately became friends, but Marilyn drew him out and asked why he was being so shy around her.
Were you afraid of me? Or
There was the day that Marilyn slipped on some rocks. She was wearing some waders, that people know, that are basically rubber and they go up almost to the hips, basically. Fly fishermen wear them and so forth. But her waders started filling with water.
Scary.
She could have drowned.
Yeah.
And Robert Mitchum, and a name we have not mentioned yet in any detail, Whitey Snyder.
Oh, yeah.
Her beloved makeup artist. Whitey is one of the heroes of her life. He was a terrific.
He and Ralph Roberts.
Ralph Roberts, absolutely. And it's ironic they both ended up being pallbearers at her funeral. The only two.
Oh, I don't think I thought about
but
that.
Anyway, the Whitey Snyder and Robert Mitchum jumped into the water and literally saved her. There's a picture in my book of Marilyn getting a piggyback ride from Whitey.
Whitey, yeah.
Filming location. The other thing that went on that wasn't all that great was that Joe DiMaggio came up there. And there's some pictures of them. He was a distraction more than he was a help.
He always brought his own wet blanket, right?
Oh, yes. That's a good way of saying it. They were filming in different locations. At one point, Whitey Snyder recalled being on a train heading somewhere, and they were looking at this gorgeous Canadian scenery, the mountains and the lakes and the beauty. And Whitey said to Marilyn, you know, honey, why don't you retire from films, get married, you and Joe find a beautiful place up here in this splendor, this scenery, and settle down and have kids. And Marilyn became very melancholy and thought about it and said, I just can't do that.
Well, for one thing, if she were to settle down and have children with him, she would have ended up living with his mama.
Probably.
Yeah.
She did learn how to prepare some of the meals that he liked.
That's right. She probably couldn't cook well enough.
No business like show business. Marilyn was kind of the gratuitous add-on to that cast. They needed something. Ethel Merman was the Broadway star, but they gave a number of things to Marilyn. Marilyn played kind of, I think, the understudy for Ethel Merman. But there's a very interesting.
Say that sentence again, because that's kind of a mind blower.
Well, Marilyn played the kind of an understudy to Ethel Merman.
Ethel Merman. That's
and it's strange because Ethel was a woman of rather large build. Marilyn wasn't really in her league in terms of experience or even her age. There were musical numbers and so forth. Or
style of delivery, her voice, the timbre of it. Yeah.
Ethel accepted the addition of Marilyn to the cast because she knew this dog of a film needed some help. But there's an interesting anecdote that Susan Strasberg tells. You know, Paul and Lee Strasberg ended up being acting coaches, but Susan Strasberg was their daughter, who ended up at the age of 16 playing on Broadway in the story of Helen Keller, and she did so without the help of her acting parents. And they kind of resented that, particularly her father.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, one day, Susan Strasberg was out in California. She visited the set and she met Marilyn. And Marilyn said, "Oh, yeah, you're the daughter of, Lee Strasberg." Well, Joe DiMaggio was there that day. So Susan Strasberg told the story about how curiously Joe DiMaggio behaved. Here he was watching the filming. Marilyn on that particular day had to do a song and dance number. And she had this gigantic headdress. I have the picture.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
The dress with the split skirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very fanciful, very heavy. Just to balance it on her head and not topple over was difficult, but she had to sing, dance, hit her marks, her key light, not stumble, not forget anything.
And she was in heels.
Heels and on the stairs besides, with a bunch of guys dancing around her. And Joe DiMaggio was off in the corner scowling.
Sulking.
And during a break, Marilyn trotted over there and gave him a peck on the cheek, and he immediately froze up. And Susan thought this was just such odd behavior. Joe made no secret of the fact that Ethel was his favorite, not Marilyn. And after Joe stomped off, I guess, Susan remained a little bit. And of course, the next thing that happened was it so unsettled Marilyn, she fell. So that's so tragic. Joe's presence on a set was not a good omen that Marilyn was going to be able to.
Well, that got repeated again, didn't it? Well, it wasn't really a set, but I'm thinking of the subway grate scene.
Well, and the next film is The 7-Year Itch in 1955. And we don't necessarily need to belabor that point again. But one thing I wanted to point out that I may not have made clear last time was that street scene that I mentioned, was filmed, but really didn't end up in the film. What happened was the scene that ends up in the film is much more modest. It shows her ankles and up to about her knees, the skirt billowing, but it's just a close-up. It does not show Marilyn's reaction in the film. But it does show, the film shot and previewed on the streets of New York, Manhattan, did show her full length and so forth. So that's a little bit of a distinction between those two films.
Well, he was just jealous. Let's face it. He was an insecure person who wanted all of her attention. And the more professional acclaim and focus that she got, the more he sulked in the corner like a child. He was just awful.
And abusive. Physically abusive.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in the extreme of her life being in danger. Not that.
Well.
He'd grab her and,
Yeah, those things escalate. She got out while she could.
It was at this point that Marilyn decided she was fed up. I have it in the book. I can't recall it off the top of my head now, but there were other scripts that were offered to her, and she wrote trash on one of them, threw it back. And she was threatened by everybody from Daryl Zanuck to secretary to the lawyers. But she, as I told you, she had actually met photographer Milton Green years earlier. And he was back on the scene. And they talked one day about her dissatisfactions. And he said, well, why don't you come out to the East Coast? He was married to Amy Green, whom I believe was a Cuban actress, attractive woman in her own right. And they had a Connecticut farm that was also a photo studio, but it's close enough that he could get into New York. He did a lot of high fashion photography, but he also had some business acumen beyond that. And he encouraged her to just make the break. Come on out. You can stay with us. And she moved into the Milton Green farm. She even babysat.
I was going to say, you read my mind. Yeah.
And we'll need to talk about the infamous Edward R. Murrow interview, which was such a hideous thing that happened during that time too. But bottom line is that Marilyn Monroe Productions, the financing had to come from somewhere, and Marilyn did make the acquaintance of Henry Rosenfeld.
Oh, the dress guy, the
Yes,
factory
multi-million
guy. Yeah.
dollar dress manufacturer. He met her at El Morocco one time, immediately fell for her, wanted to leave his wife and kids for her. She wouldn't have any of that. James Haspel did observe Marilyn and this gentleman, or maybe he wasn't a gentleman, um, in the foyer of a hotel that Marilyn was staying at. And Haspel saw this guy make inappropriate contact with Marilyn and felt that it was likely that Marilyn had not invited him up to her apartment because she had her limits. Milton was trying to foster a relationship to some extent
For the money, for the
for
financial
the money,
backing.
because the money,
Yeah.
and he did pay for Milton when he went into business with Marilyn Monroe Productions, felt she needed to maintain a Hollywood lifestyle. So he actually borrowed money against his farm, I guess, and was for a while fronting money so she could live in a nice, place. Made sure she had a T-Bird, a Thunderbird to drive around in. And even though she didn't have a driver's license, got into trouble for that. But she also needed an apartment, and Henry was the money bags for that little thing for a while. However, there was a time at which Marilyn and Milton were going to go and visit Henry to talk about financing, and who shows up but Joe DiMaggio. And Marilyn aborts the trip and runs off with Joe DiMaggio to visit his family, who also had a component of the family in New York State. And Milton was beside himself because this offended the millionaire, and it just really wasn't good business. But as I said, we'll give credit where credit is due, because Milton was more than a great photographer who photographed Marilyn in all sorts of different poses and outfits and all that. He also had some intelligence. And
Yeah, I thought it was very sad what happened to their relationship, and it
yes,
was intentional. Very
yeah.
sad. Yeah.
Marilyn ended up making Bus Stop, which was a picture that her film company produced, and it had Hope Lang in it that she was jealous of. She made Hope change her blonde hair color. She thought it was too close to hers. And Don Murray was the actor. He had actually been a stage performer.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I thought that was a terrible movie.
Yeah, I thought so too, actually.
Oh my
And
God.
Don was grateful to Marilyn, spoke highly of her, and said she should have won an award.
Oh, yeah. They said she was
for
cheated of
her.
the Oscar because she was in a battle
Yes,
with the studios
yes,
over Marilyn Monroe
yes.
Productions. Yeah.
He thought she was very cheated by that.
Yeah.
But
I
anyway,
don't see it. I just
yeah.
didn't strike me as like
Well,
this.
also remember that she took this role to heart. She played the part of Sherry,
Cherry, yeah.
Cherie, who was a kind of a has-been saloon singer who had great dreams, met the cowboy played by Don Murray, and she couldn't sing. Actually, Marilyn could sing, but she sang deliberately.
I thought it was great. That's hard to do.
She marauded through the studio wardrobe department to come up with apparel that was time-worn and didn't look good. She didn't want to be glamorous in this role. And she and Whitey Snyder perfected a makeup that was different than her normal makeup and made her look artificially pale.
Wan, yeah.
Because once again, Marilyn studied the script well enough to feel that this character she was portraying was likely sleeping all day and performing at night.
And poorly nourished.
Didn't get out in the sun to get a suntan. So she would be pale. So you got to give Marilyn credit for the cleverness of that, even if the storyline is not that appealing to either you or me.
Oh, and you know what the worst part of the movie was? That guy, the cowboy.
Yeah.
He drove me insane. I don't know.
So chauvinistic. Yeah, it was really bad. But there was the funny story that he told was there was a a close-up, where they were both talking. They were very close together talking. And when he saw the rushes, he said, "Yeah, but my top of my head is cut off." And Marilyn had a line, and she said, "Don't worry about the top of your head, Don. It's already been established in prior scenes." And so she was kind of defusing her, pillorying him for being a little bit of a prima donna. You know, what's that? You don't have my hair in there.
Well, he was a stage actor, so it probably didn't even, he
didn't really register on him.
Yeah, his focus was.
By the way, that was the film at which Natasha Lytis, whom we've not talked about yet.
No, she's on my list.
Given the Heave Ho, and Paula Strasberg. That was the first movie for that. Maybe we ought to just give a brief mention at least about Natasha. She entered the picture when Marilyn first started making movies, and she stuck with her for about 7 years. She went through about 20 movies.
Didn't they even live together for a while?
Yes, Natasha, but let's clarify that one too. Natasha was actually from Berlin. She was German. She had a theatrical and a movie background. One of her problems, however, was maybe a cultural difference between a European method of acting and filming for American audiences. And she stressed the formality of speech. And while proper diction is appropriate, it's not always right for the character you're portraying. And so Natasha and directors would sometimes get into conflict about that. She insisted on Marilyn's formality. She did have some little signals off camera. She was very close. In fact, she would sometimes be holding, supposedly, Marilyn's hand while a close-up scene was filmed, and she was just beyond the frame of the camera lens, so the camera shot, so you didn't see her. But you can observe after Marilyn has a scene that she will glance over sometimes. I actually name in my book when that happens, looking for approval, yay or nay from Natasha. Is that an acceptable take or not?
Yeah.
But you can imagine this intrusion into the filmmaking process upset a series of directors who were
Well, it's the story of her life, wasn't it? Really, story of her professional life. Was that interference. Yeah.
Natasha was less of a bulldog than with a big bite than Strasberg was.
Yeah.
Natasha had a little more sophistication. But anyway, at one point, Marilyn was in and out of a place called the Studio Club, which we can maybe have another little offshoot aside about that. It was basically a supervised dormitory where a whole bunch of actresses in their younger days got a safe environment. Men were only allowed as far as the lobby, and girls typically had two to a room, although there was a dormitory. I actually have a very interesting interview in my book with a young lady that roomed with Marilyn at the Studio Club and talked about how she didn't even have a bed. She had to sleep out in the dormitory, and just how Marilyn was more concerned about how much shelf space there is for her
books. Yeah, I thought I saw that.
Hanger space for any clothes, while other girls were getting a lot of calls from men. Marilyn was not really into that. She had a little convertible, but she was studying and so focused on her life. But she was in and out of that Studio Club. I know I'm not doing justice to describing the Studio Club experience.
Well, that people have to read the book. I mean,
that's what I was just going to say. They need to read that.
Yeah.
That whole area is very fascinating.
Now, was this when she lived for a while with Shelley Winters?
Yes. Yeah. No. Shelley was not in the Studio Club at that time. James Haspel, I don't mean to keep mentioning him as a frame of reference.
Oh, we're going to talk about him
eventually. Actually got to know Shelley Winters was the godmother of his children. He got to know her exceedingly well. And he says Shelley really exaggerated the length of time that Marilyn stayed with her. But anyway, suffice it to say that Marilyn was in and out of the Studio Club at different times. And there was the reason I brought that up. What was the reason I brought that up? What was the reason? We were talking about making bus stop.
Well, you just said she was in and out of the Studio Club. I don't know why you brought it up.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I brought that up either. There was a reason behind that. What was that? Oh, well, it was also during the period when she was kind of in a homeless situation. She was there. She was in an apartment. She was staying with Milton Green and his wife. And around the same period of 1955, I know what we're going to talk about. Natasha Lytis. Okay. The day came when Natasha was being too intrusive into Marilyn's romantic life. Joe DiMaggio didn't like her, but Marilyn was becoming very unnerved by her. And it turns out that Natasha had a crush on her.
Yeah.
She had a daughter but she was making overtures to Marilyn that were unwelcome. So Marilyn cut her off, just didn't have anything more to do with her. And hence Paula Strasberg enters the scene. That was one of the things.
Do you think she knew? Do you think she didn't suspect, and it was a sudden revelation to her that this woman had other motivations?
I think maybe she got comfortable enough with her, Natasha, I mean, that she felt that Marilyn was also more dependent on her for her acting instruction. That maybe she had a little bit more
leeway,
to press her case against Marilyn, rather than when Marilyn just started out. I mean,
did she ever know somebody who didn't try to take advantage of her in some way?
Yeah, it's hard, other than Ralph Roberts and people like that.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
Yeah.
When she signed with MCA, the head of MCA was at Marilyn's home one time, 2-story home. I believe that was when she was also, she and Joe DiMaggio were together. And Natasha rang the doorbell, and the guy from MCA answered, blocked her way, wouldn't let her even come in. But she looked up and she saw Marilyn looking out of a window. She was very hurt. After Marilyn died, then Natasha peddled stories to the British press about her supposed romance with Marilyn. Notably, she didn't bring that up while Marilyn was alive because she knew she'd be sued for slander. She was a tragic figure. She died at the age of, she died in 1964. But Natasha did help give some structure to Marilyn's life and acting method. But she did also start to make Marilyn believe that she needed an acting coach. The flip side of that is when Marilyn was criticized, she said, well, who doesn't need a coach? Boxers need a coach. Baseball players need a coach.
Point.
Lots of people need coaches.
Yeah.
So why can't I have it? But she carried it to an extreme, having the person on set with them and so forth. But when they did Bus Stop, Paula really threw her considerable weight, literally and figuratively, around. She dressed, with a black headscarf and black outfit. They nicknamed her Black Bart.
She was such an incongruous figure. That picture you put in the book, here she's surrounded by Hollywood, right? Mm-hmm. And she looks like a babushka.
Well, that's what she was trying to be. She had been in her heyday a rather attractive woman, and then she wasn't. And then she met Lee Strasberg, linked up with him. She was the brains behind the outfit. She made sure that Lee met the right people. But Susan, remember I told you Susan at the age of 16 was earning good money, and she was the one keeping the family literally in caviar
afloat,
and champagne. She spent a fortune on her parents so they could maintain the illusion of success. And Paula Strasberg was always almost like the agent for Lee. She promoted him at every opportunity. And he got quite the swollen head and was just a noxious individual, in my opinion.
Well, it's a kind of a folie à deux. The two of them.
Yeah, he was.
Just weird relationship. Weird people.
They were weird people, both short of stature, both bigger than life.
Well, hey, watch it. Just because you're short doesn't make you weird.
No, but they were. My only point being that they were bigger than life, oversized, in terms of their stature,
like
how they projected themselves, And so Bus Stop was the first thing, and Marilyn got a taste of how demanding Paula was, because she would just ruin shots. She would ruin scenes, ruin filming, if she didn't like the way Marilyn was performing something. So she got immediately into conflict with directors. And Marilyn, by that point, was, of course, a very bankable star, and she gave the studio fits going to bat for Paula, and the necessity of being on the set. The next production, of course, was The Prince and the Showgirl, which was literally filmed in England and had Sir Laurence Olivier. Now, that's quite a coup. This guy who some people have regarded as, I don't, but some people regard him as the greatest actor of all time.
Well, I thought he was horrible to her.
Yes.
A nasty person.
He was. He told her at one point, try to be sexy. On
That
the other hand,
arrogance.
he wouldn't let her dress in one dress that he claimed was too sexy, but all it was, he was afraid she was going to steal a scene from
Scene from him. Yeah.
him. And
Yeah.
now this is a guy that on camera was wearing a fake nose.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Uh,
just can't handle it. Yeah.
there's a gal a British gal, older actress that I quote in the book, and she took him aside. She didn't mind talking back to Laurence Olivier. She said, "Are you helping or hurting? You know, keep in mind, she's a young woman that's in a foreign country. She doesn't know anybody, but we need her. She's the only one that knows how to act in front of a camera." Regrettably, you know, we alluded to this once before. The Strasbergs weren't honed in on that. Lee Strasberg showed up. Laurence Olivier, of course, had the wherewithal to know that Paula was a disaster. We mentioned how she was made to leave for a while because of a visa requirement. She couldn't
Right.
remain in the country, and filming proceeded very nicely without her.
Smoothly while she was gone. Yeah, I think that's very telling. Yeah.
Lee was there, and he was banned from literally physically banned from the studio, which is a very smart thing. It was problematic doing the filming. Marilyn was heartsick when she saw what had been done to the editing. Clearly, Laurence Olivier didn't understand pacing. He had lingered on scenes of stained glass, and she wrote a very, very shrewd memo about this, critiquing the film and begging the studio to make changes to restore it to the way she'd originally seen it and envisioned it before it would be released. Alas, they did not do that. It was very hurtful to Marilyn, personally and professionally. But she said U.S. audiences don't care about stained glass windows,
Yeah.
if there were lingering camera shots. She felt that they had used inferior takes, of course, things that would, show off Laurence Olivier, because he was helping make these edits. And certain other things, the pacing of the film was too, she didn't like the music. They forfeited the romantic scenes and things. They just ruined the film, and she was heartsick about that film.
Yeah, I didn't like this movie. I have to say, it sounds like I don't like her, and that's the opposite is true. But I liked her better as a human being than as an actress. And I understand that she's this iconic figure, larger than life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't really like her movies. The only movie that she was in that I really liked was the Some Like It Hot.
Which is our next film.
You're welcome.
Yeah, 1959.
I hate to do this. I never do this because I talk all day, but I have to go.
Okay.
So is this a good place?
We'll keep people in suspense.
Yes.
You have no idea what we're going to tell you about that film.
Yeah, and then they have a little bit of a hint, and then there's a lot more to talk about as far as the people around her. So we'll start the next video. Will you be willing to come back and do
Absolutely.
another? Oh, good.
Hey,
okay. I kind of knew.
I'm getting these fat paychecks from you. It's perfectly all right. Just keep sending them.
Bribes. Can I borrow $20? Okay. This was fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. And I
hope you didn't bore everybody with this stuff. I just felt, we're talking about a film actress. We ought to talk.
You have to talk about the movies, yeah. And I hope you'll forgive me for being so critical of the movies themselves.
Oh, no, not at all.
But like I said, a product of the time, and it wasn't the best time for movies. Right. I don't believe. Right. I'm really into 1930s and 40s movies, or even before that. Now that they have the technology to display is the wrong word, but to play silent movies at the right speed. They didn't have that for a long time, and it was so annoying. Yeah, it makes it an entirely different experience. Anyway, Larry, thank you.
Thank you.
Don't go away. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching. Let us know, if you've enjoyed this litany of very interesting
if
movies.
people, I don't know how you feel about this, Helen, but if people have questions, maybe some way they can write in or whatever.
Yeah. I always encourage people to comment. Go ahead and comment. Mm-hmm. I do eventually get around to responding. Sometimes it's 1:00 in the morning, but I do. Anyway, if you have questions for Larry, I'll pass them along for sure.
Try to answer.
And just my gratitude, Larry. This has been a phenomenal experience to be able to dig down into a book like this. I really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
And in the meantime, everybody, thank you very much for watching, and we will be back. That's a threat. Slán go foil. Slánte.
Bye-bye.